This is Angela with Danceable Thoughts, and I'm excited to introduce to you the 5, 6, 7, 8 Dance Pioneers Research Project. In my many years of teaching, I utilized the in-person version of this, and now I've updated it for you. I think it's going to work great for virtual learning situations. It's an excellent opportunity for autonomous learners to work. The Dance Research Project has the students finding out 5 facts, answering 6 questions, making 7 connections about 8 different pioneers. It really brings the research and facts to life. To give you a little bit of history of this project, I want you to think about what an app running in the background is like on your phone. Well, this is a project that's running in the background while you're teaching technique, while you're working on combinations. And so therefore, I think it works wonderfully to transition into these hybrid times where you might have groups in virtual and in person. Therefore, students will always have something to do, just like my students in dance class always had the opportunity to go to our library we created to keep doing their research. So the project is big enough that they're always working. When I think about this, I want you to think about how you would take 15 to 20 pioneers that match the subject you're teaching, and then you're going to ask the students to create subsets of 8. You'll emphasize to the students that you want different subsets of 8, and that you will also want the class as a whole to cover all of them. So it encourages the students to think a little bit independently from their neighbors. When I was doing research for this project, I came across an amazing website. It was the Dance Heritage Coalition's 100 Irreplaceable Dance Treasures of the United States. That website has since been archived to the Library of Congress, but some people are able to, if you are patient enough, follow this link, copy it, click, and it may take a while to load. But when you do that, you'll find that you have a treasure trove of their defined irreplaceable dance treasures. You're going to want to supplement that list, but it's a great starting place. The objective of the 5, 6, 7, 8 project is for guided research. Students will compare, contrast, categorize, and synthesize information regarding the backgrounds, the innovations, and the great achievements of a variety of dance movement pioneers. So really, they're getting an overview of the important people in dance. Here's a list of the handouts your students would need, whether it's digital or in person. There's an overview page, there's a facts and findings page, a connections page, and then there's a facts list where they can bring all the important information down to the basics that you might want to test. The suggested timeline for this project, of course, it's going to vary for your situations, but you're going to probably need a 45-minute session to introduce the project. I always gave the students a follow-up day where they could do initial research, working with the materials, and then from then on it was up to them to do things in the background, as we said. When you're doing this as an autonomous project, they're going to be able to work at their own pace, but I think you'll overall give them about 3 weeks. I've created several different versions of a calendar that might work for you. In all of these situations, you want to make sure that they have at the end a couple of days where they have a review of how to create the 7 connections and then how to put the 7 connections actually into practice. It's going to take some thinking and a little bit of guidance from you. Autonomous learners should be able to create a portfolio of connections so that they can share those and get feedback and maybe create some other online discussion format. Let's take a calendar view of this project, reminding you that this idea is that it runs concurrently while you're doing technique or combination work in your class. It takes about 3 weeks for this project to be completed. Along the way, you'd want to do a progress check to see that students have 4 pioneers completely researched, and then again the final 8 before they go into the connections. Even for our virtual students, you'll see that the calendars are very similar. What's different for our virtual students and our autonomous students is a little bit of the verbiage about the way they would collect and submit their information. You want to make sure that you have given them proper instructions in the way that your particular school system is allowing you to store information and then share information. It will be really important that even for our autonomous learners, you find opportunities for them to get feedback and maybe even work in a paired up situation with another student to get the most out of the connections discussion. I think it's important to acknowledge that you, as the instructor, at the beginning of this project really do have to put a little extra effort in to either create the hard copy library or define the virtual library for your students. But once you do that, you are setting them up for success and autonomous learning. This is a great project for these students, and I hope that you can utilize the 100 Treasures website. But if you cannot access it, I've created a supplemental list that's available with the documents that go along with this project, and you can also see that at the end of this video. Here are some practical tips in the vein of classroom management for that hard copy library. We want to make sure you have a summary list of all the pioneers that are acceptable for the students to research. I also think you should number that class set and keep it in a designated area. And it always helps to have a student librarian that will check at the end of class to make sure all the materials have been properly returned. Creating your virtual or autonomous library, you still want to organize by genre or give them a specific characteristic or time period. You also want to create a summary listing of the pioneers that are applicable for your project, and be sure you post a list of acceptable resources if you're going to let the students do this independently. We've got the resources ready. Now let's get the students ready to take off on this project. Each student will need their own copy of the overview page. I think it's a great idea for the facts and findings page for you to give them 8 copies to match the 8 pioneers, and each student needs their own copy of the connections page. There are other pages in the documents that you've gotten along with this project that will be supplemental. Grading, this is a major project. I hope you weight it accordingly, and I think it's very important that you maybe do daily grade progress checks along the way. If you have the opportunity at the end of the project to allow your students to work collaboratively, I really suggest using that fact summary sheet where they get information on all the pioneers, great review for a possible test later on. You've seen the calendar version of this project. Here are the written versions of the grading suggestions, reminding you and the students you want independent work. You want 8 different pioneers, so you have as many different versions of the end work. Very important for your autonomous learners that you do those progress checks. And if you want a simple way to grade this, you can just collect the connections section of this project and grade that independently at the end. Reminding you there are a lot of other summary activities and extensions and enrichment activities that you can do from the connections page. That's up to you. So here is the overview page. You'll also have a separate video that explains how to use this video, so you could use that independently with your students. This gives you the whole project all written out on one page. This is the 5 facts page, and here's how these facts play out. The primary genre of the dance of the pioneer, the birth dates, death if applicable, the before famous, this is about locations, where they've been, where they grew up, the career starter moment, what really launched them, and then the time frame, so the students get a kind of a sense of where and when things were happening. This is the fact-finding page. It has the 5 facts and then a copy of the 6 questions that you're going to answer about each of the pioneers, so that eventually you will build the connections. This is where we start thinking more descriptively and more creatively about the career of the pioneer. First, the personal background has to do with their family influences, cultural profile. The second thing that we want to talk about is their dance background, who they worked with, who they learned from. We even think about it as a travel diary. Where did their dance world take them? Unique concepts. This is special uses of technology, special ways of staging, costuming, anything they've done that's very unique. Interactions has a lot to do with other forms. And then finally, what are the iconic achievements of this dance pioneer? So famous works and things like written work they may have done, books, etc. In the 7 connections page, this is where the students are really going to start synthesizing information. What is really wonderful about the 7 connections is that it asks students, instead of using the terms compare, contrast, find similarities, it's new verbiage for synthesizing this information, putting these people together in different ways so that they can see where their connections may be. So it might be a family tree in the sense of professional relationships. It could be geographic, who was all in New York at one particular time. It's also interesting to know what their major accomplishments were. We also think about what they have as similarities. Do they have similar experiences socially and culturally? We think about the shapeshifters, those who have gone from one form to another. And then the last 2 are super fun for the students, the exact opposites and the best friends. So even though these pioneers may not have lived and worked in the same time period or same location, the students are asked to find opposite characteristics and similar characteristics. We're going to do all of this work, so we're constantly working with 8 different pioneers. So everyone has different answers. That's what makes this project really beautiful. I mentioned this summary page. This is a great way if you are in a situation where the students are able to work collaboratively at the end. This summary page is just for them to put down all the 5 basic information facts on all the pioneers that you cover, and then you can create a test from that very easily. Bring these facts to life in artistic ways with some of these optional activities. These would be difficult for the autonomous learners to do, but not impossible. You can extend this for collaborative learning by using graphic organizers. So this page looks very complicated when you see it all on one screen, but it's got different kinds of graphic organizers that I suggest that you use for this information based on the connections. There's a family tree, there's a map, there's some columns and categories for the people who are shapeshifters. You even see the arrows facing in, and we have the arrows facing out for the opposites. And then how you could take that summary page and make it come to life is to create those little ID cards that you see down in the bottom corner. Let's take a closer look at the way the tree project is done, because it's not a family tree in the sense of marriages and children, but professional relationships and students. You can do this on the individual level on the connections page, but as a group, collaboratively, you could create one with all the students in the way they see the relationships. Sticky notes work great for this. As an autonomous project, the students would probably want to expand to more than just their 8 pioneers. They would create their own simple diagram. I've got an example of that. See where we start with our pioneer, our genre, and we move out, and they can draw lines to show the connections. This is an easy way for them to visualize how these dance artists work together or interact. The map project is a little bit different. This is a United States map. You might use a world map as well, depending on what subject you have the students exploring. Again, an autonomous learner can work on this project. I've got an example where they could take each individual pioneer and then maybe take 3 of them and map out their significant information. I've got an example how you can do this as well. Using this, I used our friend Alvin Ailey from the state of Texas, and I gave color details for each of these things. So if you see the blue, that represents Texas and where he was born. You can also look at the green in California, where he did predominantly most of his work and his learning. I have the yellow and the red over in the east, basically around New York. This is where most of his professional achievements happen. And really, red is supposed to mean all the different places he traveled. Well, he traveled all over the world. For connections 3, 4, and 5, this is really just categorizing information in different ways, finding similarities. Your virtual learners can create charts and tables for this. Your in-person or your collaborative learners, they can create many different versions of this. This offers the greatest variety of thinking in any of these projects, because this has really an opportunity for the students to decide how these pioneers should be grouped. For connections 6 and 7, these ideas, just these simple graphics, the arrows going away from each other for exact opposites, or for the arrows pointing to each other that they could have easily been best friends. These spark some of the very best conversations among your students. So if you have a chance to use this as an open discussion, it's a wonderful thing to let your students really debate who would be collaborating, who would be on opposite sides of the artistic spectrum. Your autonomous learners also can do this. I suggest that they take each of their 8 pioneers and find an exact opposite and find a potential best friend. And they can use these simple graphics to create their visual representation of who their pioneers would work with successfully and who they might not work so successfully with. All of these, like I said, are optional activities. They all take quite a bit of work. This brings us around to the last of the optional activities. This is based on that facts sheet, the summary sheet. This is the idea that you would create an ID card for each of the pioneers you worked with. If you have a full class working on this, then it would be really easy for you to get all of your pioneers that you've been studying covered. I think that if you ask your autonomous learners to do this, this might be a lot of work for them as well. They could do just their 8. I suggest that they put this together in maybe a slideshow format for you. As promised, I do have a supplemental list of dance pioneers. They're spanning the decades. I started with the America's Irreplaceable Dance Treasures, that first 100, and then, truth be told, I just decided to go through the internet on my own and put some important people in that I felt like could be connected to the people who had already been considered as part of those 100 irreplaceable treasures. I tried to move them forward into the 21st century as well. You really want to think about how you're going to ask these students to interact with this. I've got it divided by genre very loosely. One of the most important things that you're going to notice is that many of these pioneers cross over to different genres, and that's what we want our students to learn about them, that there's not just a specific style that most dancers do. They interact in many different ways, and you can find different ways to connect these people through many of the details of their life. So final thoughts, again, there are infinite ways for your students to work through this material. Give them a sense of the diverse and rich history of our dance world. The most meaningful interactions the students will have with this material is through the 7 connections. That's really that higher level thinking that we hope that our students will develop and strive to do. So whether in person, virtual, or autonomous, or some hybrid, this is an assignment that will keep students actively engaged in learning and more deeply interested in the world of dance. I hope that you can utilize the 5, 6, 7, 8 project with your students, and I'd love to hear feedback from you. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this project, and let me know if I can help you in any way to develop the project more specifically for your group by reaching me at Angela@danceablethoughts.com.